Hey guys, we're going to begin a brand new book today called A More Perfect Union. Here we go. And as always, I really want you to pay attention to the words, okay? Pay attention to what I'm saying. All right. 1787. Over 200 years ago, America was still a very young country. Representatives from the 13 colonies met in 1776. When did they meet? 1776. They wrote the Declaration of Independence, which told King George III of England that the colonies wanted to rule themselves. Well, the colonists formed their own government and fought the Revolutionary War to win their freedom. What was the name of the war? The Revolutionary War. 10 years later, in 1786, America was in trouble. The government was not working well, and many people were poor. The 13 states were not cooperating with each other. The government had no way to raise money, and there was no president to help the states work together as one nation. This is what the United States was in 1787. Let me show you this picture. Let's see if we can see it. Boom. Right there. Let's get close. Okay? The leaders of the new country were very worried and sad to see America in so much trouble. They were afraid the country would fall apart if something was not done to make the government strong. So they decided to hold a special meeting. They called it a convention. What did they call it? A convention. So they wanted to figure out what could be done. And a few leaders from each state were invited to come to Philadelphia in May 1787. That was a long time ago. Well, important men began arriving in Philadelphia. George Washington and James Madison came from Virginia. Alexander Hamilton was sent from New York, and Benjamin Franklin was there to speak for Pennsylvania. So, even before the convention began, the men were talking over their ideas and their plans. Nearly all of them knew one another, as some of them helped to write the Declaration of Independence. But many had fought in the Revolutionary War, and most had served in the government. Now they were all anxious to help their country again. Well, the convention was going to begin on May the 14th, but most of the people didn't arrive by that date. Travel was very slow in those days. Some men came long distances by horseback, by carriage, or by ship. No cars. The trip to Philadelphia from New Hampshire or Georgia could take 2 or 3 weeks. In addition, the weather was bad. Finally, by May 25th, most of the delegates had arrived and the convention began. The convention took place in the State House on Chestnut Street. What was the name of the street? Chestnut Street. This building, which we now call Independence Hall, is where the Declaration of Independence had been signed. At the very first meeting, the people voted to make George Washington the leader of the convention. Here's a picture of what Independence Hall would have looked like. Let's make sure I can get it. Boom, right there, right there. You see that? You see that? Yeah, back to the story. James Madison offered to write down everything that happened during the meetings so there would be a record of everything that was said. That's important, boys and girls. Sometimes when you have a meeting, it's important to write things down so you know exactly what's being said. So even though the convention lasted for 16 weeks, wow, that's a long time, Madison did not miss a single meeting. His work was so important that he's called the father of the Constitution. James Madison is called the father of the Constitution. When George Washington took his place at the desk, on the platform, Benjamin Franklin noticed the sun covered on his chair. Franklin wondered whether it was a rising sun or a setting sun. He did not have much time to think about it, however, as the work of the convention had begun. This is what he saw when he looked on his chair. You see him? You see him looking on his chair? You see me? You see him? You see that sun? Ah, there it is. During the next few days, the men made a set of rules to help the convention run smoothly. Some of the rules were each state would have one vote, a majority or more than half the votes would rule, and everything that happened at the meetings would be kept secret until after the convention was over. That's voting. Some of those who came from Philadelphia early included George Washington and James Madison, and they came up with a plan to form a new government. Governor Edmund Randolph of Virginia presented the plan of the convention. So it became known as the Virginia Plan. The plan called for a government elected or chosen by the people. So the people were the ones who were going to vote people or make people be in charge. And my background just went off. But that's okay. We're going to keep reading. Each state would choose delegates to serve in Congress. The number of delegates from each state would depend on the size of the state. This meant that the big states would have more power than the small states because they would have more votes in Congress. Many of the people were very surprised by the Virginia Plan. They thought the convention would fix up the old government, not make a new one. They had to decide, should they create a new government for America? They didn't know. And they took a vote, and the yeses won. So when we vote, so let's say we're going to vote for a class president for our class. So now maybe I would have each of you write down some of their names, and we'll put them in a hat, and then we'll see how many of you got the most votes, and that's who wins. That's how voting is done. Okay? Now, right away, the delegates began to argue. The members from each small state thought the Virginia Plan was unfair. I want to see if I can get this background back up. Let's see what happens. No, thank you. I'm going to turn it off. Go off. Boom. Here we go. So they thought it was unfair. And the member they wanted each state to have the same number of representatives, people that represented them. Finally, some of the members from the small states came up with a plan of their own called the New Jersey Plan. It said, except for some small changes, the old government was fine. The most important thing that the Jersey Plan said was that all the states, no matter what size, would have the same number of representatives or people to represent them. After a few days of talking, the majority voted against the New Jersey Plan, and the delegates from the small states had lost their fight and were disappointed. But they decided to work with the other delegates to come up with a plan that would satisfy both people. So sometimes, guys, remember we talked about this before, when we disagree on something, we have to come up with a plan so that we could agree on something, right? And that's what they did here. They came up with a plan so that way everybody got what they wanted. Well, each side had given up something it wanted in order to create a plan that both sides could accept. The plan was called the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise. It was made up of some parts of the Virginia Plan, some parts of the New Jersey Plan, and some ideas from both plans, right? And this is how the more perfect union was begun. So remember, when we can't agree on something, what we need to do is look at what somebody said over here and then look at what somebody said over here and put it together to come up with a way that we can all get what we want, right? That's good planning. Thank you for tuning in to today's reading of A More Perfect Union. I will talk to you a little bit later on today. Peace and elbow grease.